just click it. Up. Yeah. Hello, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for coming and sticking with us for the last panel of the afternoon. My name is Nina Hernandez. I'm the copy editor, the brand new copy editor at the Austin Monitor. I've also been a reporter for the last 3 years at the Austin Chronicle. We are here today to talk about broadband access, particularly in rural areas, and how that sort of that gap that we have right now really affects how we live in our communities, like Austin and all over the state. So can we start by just each of you kind of down the line introducing yourselves and in particular why you got interested in broadband?
Okay, so hello everybody. My name is Mark Smith. I'm the director of the Texas State Librarian Archives Commission and also the State Librarian of Texas. The State Librarian Archives is a state agency, and we're charged with a number of functions in addition to holding the archives of the state of Texas and other functions. We also work with libraries across the state, that is public libraries as well as school and college and university libraries, to provide a variety of capacity building services to help those institutions serve their clienteles better. And one of the things that we're really interested in right now is the topic of broadband deployment in our public libraries in all across the state, rural areas, cities, and just all across the state, because we've got a really deep need there.
Awesome. Representative Howard?
Yes, I'm Donna Howard. I'm a state representative here in Austin, and I am probably the least technologically aware person up here. In fact, I'm looking at the schedule and I think public school finance now would have been really comfortable on that panel. But,
missed the boat.
But that being said, I am interested in this topic. I have been working on this topic primarily because we have opportunities to do some things in the legislature to help speed this along a bit. And for me in particular, looking at public education, when we passed some legislation, HB 5, for those of you that may or may not be aware of it, that created multiple pathways to graduation, there are not as many opportunities for some Texas students in the rural parts of our state, and even in the urban areas, quite frankly, sometimes, to have access to some of the things that we put in place that are supposed to help them become college and career ready. We have a responsibility as a state to make sure that all of our students have access to the same kinds of opportunities. This is the biggest way that we could make that happen. This is a game changer for many, many students and communities in our state. So I'm committed to doing what I can to make sure we take advantage of opportunities before us this next session to get connected throughout the state. And certainly with what Mark was just saying, you know, for years we've also been interested in the fact that what the state libraries and archives have been doing, libraries have been a source of connection for especially rural Texans who don't have any other options. And in this day and age, when we're doing everything from health records to employment to being politically engaged to connecting with the Capitol and hopefully one day to being able to vote and do those kinds of things, we need to be connected. The libraries, the schools, the whole communities, and we have some challenges, and I'm interested in working on that.
Excellent.
So my name is Mark Strama, and I lead the Google Fiber operations here in Austin. And I got interested in broadband when I started leading the Google Fiber operations here in Austin. I took it for granted until then, as I took for granted that when I flip a switch, lights come on, and when I turn a faucet, water comes out, and I can drink it, and I don't die when I drink it, which are things we all take for granted, but that are actually nothing short of a miracle in the truest sense of the word. Now that I've been working on it for 3.5 years, I have a pretty deep understanding of how that happens, how that service, how that ability to access all of the world's knowledge on demand, instantaneously, how that's delivered to us. And while my focus on it is in a metropolitan area here in Austin, and Google Fiber is generally delivering this service in large metropolitan areas with dense populations. In my spare time, I've given a lot of thought to the question of how do we get this level of service to more sparsely populated areas. It is not an easy problem for the market to solve, as was also the case when with rural electrification.
Right.
And it's a similar challenge, and it probably lends itself to similar solutions in many respects. So that's my interest in it.
Excellent. Yeah, and you know, kind of to piggyback off of what you said, you know, you've been in this game for the last 3 or so years. I'd be interested to know, and if either of you have thoughts on it, I'd welcome as well. How much has it changed in the last 3.5 years? How quickly are we moving?
That's a good question. If I take let me just factor rural out for a minute and speak to that generically. It has changed a ton. If you remember when Google announced they were bringing fiber to Austin, the slogan was 100 times faster internet, because it's gigabit speed internet service. You can't use that slogan anymore, because the average speed of the internet went up from 10 megabits per second to a higher number since in those 3 years. So now it's like 90-something times faster, but it's, you know, lost that easy nomenclature. The internet is getting faster in metropolitan areas. And in the metropolitan areas where there is competition, it's getting a lot faster and cheaper at the same time. Mm-hmm. So competition is a difficult thing to achieve in such a capital-intensive industry. But there is now a substantial body of research that indicates that in the markets with greater competition, speeds, service levels, and costs are a lot better for consumers. That's part of what's driving what has changed in the last 3 years, is that the marketplace has become a bit more competitive. The other thing driving the change is technological innovation, as it always does. The technological innovation takes a variety of forms. It really is a function of what medium are you delivering internet service over. Are you delivering it over a coaxial network, or a fiber network, or a wireless network? And there's innovation happening in all 3 of those areas that is expanding the capacity and the speed of the internet. This does become interesting in the context of rural America, because when we think about the problem of delivering super fast internet in sparsely populated areas, if it requires the capital investment in wired line service all the way to the last mile, you're talking about a lot of miles of investment without a lot of customers at the end of it. So the innovation that's happening in wireless, and I can quickly get out of my depth talking about this because it's an engineering discussion at this point, but the innovation that's happening in wireless is really promising for rural communities. And it's not that there's not already wireless solutions available in rural areas. There are. It's that the speed, the capacity, and the cost of it are all improving at a pretty dramatic pace.
Excellent.
And I was going to say, based on some of the things he just said, which I could not tell you the definition of many of the terms that he just used, and I'm not unusual at the legislature, and we are in
You are unusual.
Oh, well, thank
Oh,
you.
yes, indeed.
I can vouch for that.
That lie.
Okay, well, that being said, anyway, we need a lot of education and partnership with those in industry to put into place the kind of policy that moves us in the direction we want to go. You were just mentioning something about coaxial and fiber and all this. Well, you know, you would say that to us at the legislature, and we wouldn't know, most of us wouldn't know the first thing about that, or how we should appropriately invest in this. I think the way it looks like it's shaping up for us at the state right now is our partnership is with the school districts and taking advantage of the E-rate so that we can get fiber out there to the rural areas and then let industry be involved with that last mile. We
Yes.
can do the beginning miles.
Given our company on this panel, let's say that our partnership is with the school districts and the public libraries.
Of course, we
Well,
definitely
I'll
say that.
comment on that when the time comes,
Yeah,
but
go
yeah.
ahead, because that's absolutely, go ahead.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. The TEA has a request item in this next legislative session for $25 million as 1/10 of the cost and the rest provided through E-rate
Right.
to bring the infrastructure out to K-12s, and that's a great idea. It has to happen, and I think we in the library community regard that as, bringing the pipe out to these places, and then we can get the libraries on as well. That's an infrastructure development. It really has to happen, and it's a great strategy to do that. The problem becomes just that serves the K-12 students during the day. So when the bell rings, they need a place to go to get the access, and the general public needs a place to go to get the access. So that's where that's the part that the library fills in. But just in terms of the change, those of us that used to think that a T1 line, which is 1.5 megabit of speed, was like a really great connection to have. Now it's just things have changed so much. I saw some statistic that said that I think that on average, individuals use approximately or have about 3,500 megabits of data flow through their phone each week, and within the next 5 years, that's expected to go to 15,000 megabits. So one of the problems that I think that we have to think about in terms of policy development is that there's a tendency to think that just having a cell phone with internet access is adequate to address the problem. And I think that what a lot of policymakers are considering is that just having the cell phone access, it's important, but it's not enough. So there's a tendency to kind of get stuck on that idea.
I want to the point you made about, we used to serve together in the legislature. Now I'm throwing around terms that make me sound like I know what I'm talking about on technical issues, right? So
Yeah.
the first year of my work here, I used all the skills I developed and sitting behind the dais grilling people in committee hearings to just ask all the questions that needed to be asked for me to get to the level of being able to pretend to understand all this stuff, right? And now I spend a lot of time thinking, because we do engage policymakers in some areas, thinking, how on earth do I take the year's worth of due diligence I had to do just to have a, moderately competent conversation with our engineers? How do I translate all of that to policymakers who are being asked to adjudicate difficult policy disputes that require a pretty in-depth understanding of this technical stuff? An example in Nashville, Tennessee, is that their city council adopted a policy that enables the deployment of new infrastructure, new networks, new communications networks, by allowing the new entrant to the market to move the other facilities on a utility pole to create room for the new attachment. And that's an extraordinarily kind of complicated but opaque debate, right? That matters a lot to infrastructure builders and communications companies, and not a lot to anybody else, except to the extent that competition in the marketplace really does increase speeds and reduce prices for consumers. In that sort of in that degree of separation, in that removed way, it does affect everybody, but not in a way that you would expect them to care a whole lot about, right? So figuring out how to take these complicated issues of infrastructure and technology and reduce them to a way that a policymaker can do something more than just vote for who they know and trust, right? Which is so often the situation. You guys have to vote on, you probably cast 5,000 votes a session.
At least.
And you're supposed to be fully informed on each one. A whole lot of the time, I know when I was there, it was, who did I trust? And so I wrestle a lot. And this, because the issue of rural broadband is going to depend a lot on technological innovation as much as on policy innovation. But that the two are intermingled. It's going to be really hard to figure out, it's going to require a few people in the legislature probably to make themselves experts, as you have on school finance, as certain members who are the trusted expert on certain complicated issues.
Yeah, and that's a good point. And there are some younger folks coming along in the legislature who probably do have more of a handle on this than some like myself. In terms of the E-rate and taking advantage of that right now, for me, with my limited understanding, we only have one more year to take advantage of that. And so even if it's not doing everything we need to have done and it's leaving certain things out, it's a piece that needs to be done incrementally in all the things that need to be done to make sure that we're getting where we need to go.
Right, absolutely. The piece that you're referring to is the infrastructure building piece.
Yeah.
So E-rate has several different buckets of funding, and that one is time sensitive, and we do need to take advantage of that in that time period. So that's why I say that's a great strategy to do that. We are also pursuing a strategy on a different bucket of the E-rate money that has to do with the ongoing charges for telecom. So we have, libraries are one of the entities that are E-rate eligible. And we only have about 23% of our libraries in the state that participate in E-rate funding, which compares to about 65% in the rest of the country. So we are underutilizing the E-rate funding pretty significantly. So one of our strategies is to try to get to a point where we can incentivize these libraries to be able to try to actually navigate the very arcane system of applying for E-rate funding and be able to access some of those dollars. It's important because the kinds of speeds that we need to have in the libraries cost somewhere around $3,000 a month. That's just, $36,000 a year is just completely unaffordable for most of our libraries in Texas, especially the smaller rural libraries. But E-rate can bring that down to as much as 90% reduction. So $300 a month is more like it. So that's kind of our strategy to see if we can bring more broadband out to the communities through incentivizing and encouraging and supporting libraries participating in E-rate.
And I think part of the challenge we've seen with the schools, similarly to what you're talking about, especially in the rural areas, is putting them in the position to actually apply through this arcane and complicated process, which is definitely a challenge.
Oh, it's a total
And then
challenge.
our understanding, too, is that some actually have the fiber, but they're not fully utilizing what they have. There's a huge knowledge gap that exists, too. And then a further example of the complication here is I know our education service centers have been helping the school districts, but then they're in a apparently kind of a complicated situation in terms of what their actual role can be in terms of the rules required to get these funds. So there's a whole lot of pieces here, and we don't have a lot of time.
Exactly.
And trying to leverage what we can while we can to make something happen.
Exactly.
But I bet that it would be easier to get everybody on board or up to speed across the board if the infrastructure was there. But, Mark has talked a lot about competition. If you look at a lot of the maps, in some of these counties, you may have no providers or you may have one provider in town or in the county. What is that? Is there a way to encourage that competition when there's, they may be only doing business with themselves?
I get this question all the time from mayors of smaller towns. Do we have some here?
Next gig. No, I'm saying that's my next gig, Mayor.
Of a smaller town?
Oh, right.
Right here? Okay. Well, mayors of smaller towns are always asking, and I think in response to demand from their constituents, how do I get other communications companies to come and invest in my market and serve my customers, because my customers want a choice. They don't want to be captive to a monopoly provider. It's, like I said, it's a hard economic case for somebody to invest a whole lot of linear mileage of infrastructure to serve a relatively small segment of.
Although Google Fiber
Customers.
has tried to do some of that, right?
We're primarily in metropolitan areas. Now, I mean, let's go to the extreme case, right? In Africa, you've probably read about experimentation that Google has done, putting stratospheric helium balloons emanating Wi-Fi signals so that there's Wi-Fi available in extremely sparsely populated
Now that's some Star Trek stuff.
areas. It's some
Yes,
Star Trek stuff.
yes.
But that's probably not the appropriate solution for rural Texas, right? So let me tell you what I now point to as an area of opportunity for these small-town mayors who are interested in making their market more competitive. Huntsville, Alabama. We've just entered into a partnership with Huntsville, Alabama, where their electric utility, they have a municipally owned electric utility like ours, their electric utility is building a fiber network to the homes in Huntsville, Alabama. I would say Huntsville, Alabama probably wouldn't have been on the list of cities that companies like ours would be prioritizing to deploy to because it doesn't have the density or the large customer base as other markets. But they're building it themselves. They want it, by the way, for smart grid management purposes. But they can't get quite enough return on the investment in a smart grid to justify the cost of a fiber to the home network. So what they did was they issued, I think, an RFI asking, are there any communications companies that would want to lease access on this fiber network so that our customers to whom we're deploying this fiber smart grid can also get the benefits of fiber internet service and fiber delivered television service. And we said, yeah. And so we're their anchor tenant on this network. They're building a fiber network. We're going to deliver internet and television service over it. So can anyone else, by the way. And now the Huntsville Electric Utility has a smart grid. I can't say that will happen for every city that says, okay, we want to build a fiber network ourselves. And in Texas, we have a prohibition on municipally operated communications networks, but it's not clear that would prevent them from leasing access to a network, to wholesaling it, and then allowing competition on the retail side of it. That's one way that I think there is some opportunity for these markets that have a hard time attracting multiple providers in. That's one way for them to think creatively about public-private partnerships.
Yeah. I think that this business of public-private partnerships is such a great way to kind of facilitate these kinds of connections. I think it's great.
No, go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to, I don't want to shift the conversation too much, but
By all means.
one of the things, I mean, the infrastructure is one challenge. The other challenge is having the policy framework. And one of the things that Texas doesn't have, and we need to have, in my opinion, so I'll lobby the representative while I'm here. But we need to have a statewide broadband office, and it's kind of when you look at the states that have been successful in deploying broadband out to the widest possible and get the best scores, and Texas gets one of the worst scores in terms of that. What they have in common is that they have a broadband office located somewhere within state government, frequently within the governor's office or elsewhere in state government. And I think it's a really critical thing. If we had that, we'd have one vehicle for encouraging those kinds of public-private partnerships and other kind of really creative solutions to occur.
Now, we used to have
You used to have the
something in
Telecommunications
Department of
Infrastructure Fund.
Was that the Department of Ag?
Oh, no, that was a project, Connected Texas? Is that
Yes.
what you were
Connect
referring?
Texas,
yes,
Connect
we had that.
Texas. Connect Texas was funded by a grant from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, but the grant expired
And it's
a
gone.
year or two ago. But previously we had something called the Telecommunications Infrastructure Fund, which was enabled by the Telecom Act in '96. Texas was actually a year ahead of the federal government in terms of devoting kind of a state agency to looking at options for telecommunications build out in the state, but that sunsetted a number of years
I think
ago.
that was one of those fees that was being collected and not
It
used
was.
for its intended purpose. And in fact, I think that was one of the first things that current Speaker Strauss did as
I
a
remember.
state rep, was
That's
got
so
rid of
funny.
that. Uh-huh,
Yeah.
yeah.
But as you pointed out, I mean, you know, what are we doing now, and can, if we're not, if that initiative or that sentiment isn't as robust as it once was, could we do something in the next session? Sorry, could we do something in the next session, or is that just something that's kind of, you know, on the back burner in terms of really, you know, creating an agency or something that would
Well, I think there's
encourage that?
interest in state government, and I know the governor's office is interested in broadband deployment. So.
Sure, and there's been talk too of having a chief technology officer, which we do not have. And perhaps this could be something that could be combined with that. There are a couple of legislators who are looking at that right now. You know, I think there's a lot of interest at the state in looking at something
Right.
that makes us function more efficiently and better, and understanding how we're operating, because we've had a lot of issues in recent times with our contracts on a variety of things, not just just talking about technology, but the fact is we're very scattered in a lot of ways and don't have expertise in a centralized fashion that can help us be better users and better planners here. So I think that's something that actually could have a lot of resonance in this session.
Awesome. Hope so.
Hope so.
She says all her
I think
questions.
we
She's
covered it
done.
all.
Yeah.
I'm finished. I'm completely spent.
Well, I'll ask Mark while you're looking to tell me what this means.
You brought questions
I,
for
no,
me?
no, no, I didn't
is
put your
this?
name on there. Well, this is just
going
notes
so
for
well.
me, because I don't understand all of this. Like, okay, so,
Do I blame Jacob for this?
yeah, you can. So there's a 2014 goal of 100 kbps and a 2018 goal of 1 mbps.
Oh, and it does say ask
I
Strama.
know, it does.
Jacob,
I just thought I'd do
He
that since
worked
we had
for
a
me
pause.
before he worked for-
Yeah, well, that's what happens. That's what happens.
this is literally a quiz.
Yeah, it is. No, but the point is, and I don't care if you can answer that or not, but you might can.
Oh, I totally can.
Well, see.
What do you think I've been doing here for
But
3
see,
years?
okay, but look, this is the thing, and the reason I even bring it up is because in the survey that was done, 64% of school districts in the state, which includes 45% of our students, so that means 55% are not even at this, meet the 2014 goal.
Yeah, even though
Okay,
they may already
be on fiber. Yeah, and
This is
so-
the stuff that the governor's office has been talking, yeah, okay.
So, I mean, that's an issue, and then we don't even understand what that means, and here we are
Yeah.
trying to catch up.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Is that okay if we went ahead?
I got you.
Okay,
Let's talk about that.
okay.
Thanks, Jacob. So let's talk about speed for a minute. I said earlier, we're a gigabit per second service. That's super fast. That's 1,000 megabits per second. That doesn't mean anything more to you than a gigabit per second does. Like, what does that mean?
It's
right?
faster.
And you think of it and you can't exactly correlate it to the memory you think of when you think, oh, I've got a photo on my camera and it says it's 3.4 megabytes of data. Those are bytes, not bits, which is 8 times as much data in a byte as in a bit. And so gigabits per. So here's what I think is being referenced there. Your home internet connection, if you're not on a gigabit if you're not on a fiber connection to the home, most people's the average home internet connection is in the area of 12 to 13 megabits per second. When we first started getting online, when you had to dial in on a dial-up connection and listen to that screeching noise,
AOL.
that was 56 kilobits per second. And that's obviously a lot, so it takes a lot of kilobits to get to a megabit, it takes a lot of megabits to get to a gigabit. When you've got a gigabit, you've got a lot of bandwidth. Think about, just for perspective on that, think about the difference between that dial-up connection that you used to have and your connection today. Say it's 10 megabits per second. You probably feel pretty unconstrained in that 10 megabit per second environment. It feels pretty good because you remember that dial-up connection. Here's what you probably forget. Some of us do. You probably look back at that dial-up connection and groan and think, oh, that was terrible. You did not think it was terrible then. You thought it was awesome. You didn't say to yourself, oh, I can't download a video. You would have never thought to download a video on the internet. That's not what the internet was
Or
for.
even a photo.
Right? What you
even a
thought
photo.
was, or even a photo, right? What you thought was, this is awesome, I can send an email and
That's
a
right.
person on the other side of the world can get it instantaneously.
Or even the other part of the state.
Or the other side of the
Yeah.
I always tell everybody, you know what came before dial-up internet service? The library,
Right.
the shopping mall, and the post office. And when you got dial-up internet service, you didn't think, oh, this is so slow. You thought, oh my God, this is awesome. And then we got broadband, 10 to 12 megabits per second, and it makes dial-up internet service look really bad, right? Because now we think of the internet as being a place where you can do all kinds of things that we didn't think of it as being a place you could do when all we had was dial-up. When a critical mass of people have gigabit connections, we will experience that step change again. The increase in speed from dial-up to broadband was an increase in speed of about 10 megabits per second. The increase in speed from broadband to gigabit is an increase of over 900 megabits per second. It is a much bigger change. Now, the things you can do with that speed today are pretty much the same things you can do with today's speeds, because not enough people have gigabit speeds for the people who develop applications to have created applications that require gigabit connections. If I had created a really killer app that only worked on a gigabit connection, the number of people who could use my app is really small. And most people would consider it broken because they'd be trying to access it over a 10 megabit connection and it wouldn't work for them. So it won't be until a lot of people have gigabit connections that the applications emerge. I mean, we have outlier cases. We have a geneticist in Provo who's one of our gigabit customers because we have Google Fibers in Provo. And that guy takes home his hard disk from the office every day so that he can plug it into his home internet connection so that he can upload terabytes of data of decoded human genomes that he shares with researchers around the globe that, according to his own blog post about this, which is how I heard about it, he uses to save people's lives, right? So that's an edge case. That's not what most of us are going to use gigabit connections for.
Right.
Most of us are going to play video games on it.
Hey.
Watch Netflix.
Right. I'm with you.
But that's pretty cool. Okay, so I think that what you're hearing is that what I understand to be the governor's office's concern on this issue is that there are cases where the physical infrastructure exists, but the speed isn't being delivered that this
Right.
physical infrastructure is capable of.
Right.
I am not sure I understand why that's happening. It could be a function of lack of competition. It could be a function of procurement practices, right? Somebody locked in a contract based, things have changed a lot per your first question, right? It may have been that they signed a contract for what seemed like a perfectly reasonable amount of bandwidth at a perfectly reasonable price, but they signed a long-term contract and it's no longer a good deal. So I don't have a good feel for why that exists, but I have heard that that's a real problem, that our physical infrastructure is not matched by the service levels of which it's capable.
Well, and then to get back to why it's of concern to me and in my role is because we have probably out of over 5 million school kids in this state, we have probably close to 1 million, it's 800,000 to 1 million, who are rural. And we need to make sure that we understand this enough to ensure that they have in a public education system, equal opportunity. And it's going to be those kids who are going to figure out what those next things are that right now will make what we're doing now look antiquated as they're coming along. But they have to have the tools to be able to do that. And it's not just this. The big thing for us at the state right now is computer science and those kinds of things that we don't even have that in place in our schools, even in the urban areas. This is the way I think of it from my generation is, we all took typing because that's what we did then back in the day. Everybody had to know that because that was a basic skill for everything that happened in your world.
Right.
Well, now computer science is a basic skill that needs to be there for every student to have, which is a little different than what we're talking about here, but it's all related. It's all part of the same kind of thing. We need to be looking at all of this and recognizing we have a great big state that has some areas that are very difficult, have difficulty accessing some of the same things. What do we do in state policy making and state appropriations to try to move this the correct direction and not take us down some path that somebody thought was good at the time but hadn't really thought through in the bigger context of what we really need to be doing.
Right. And you talk about education, which is awesome, but also, and hopefully Mark can extrapolate on this a little bit, a lot of people that the public library serves are adults. And especially, I don't know exactly, our unemployment rate in Texas is like maybe 4.5% or something like that. So, when we're talking about going to a public library, it's not it is kids after school and books and internet, et cetera, but it's also people working from home if they don't have stable internet access, particularly in rural areas, people looking for jobs, sending out resumes, that kind of thing, where they need access. So how does the public library take care of that particular demographic?
Right. Well, we're the digital safety net. I mean, we're the place where, so for an estimated 60+% of communities that have public libraries, the public library is the only place that people can get free internet access outside if they don't have it at the home. So, and they use it for employment opportunity. They use it for educational purposes. They use it for civic engagement. They use it to access health information. Just a whole range of resources that they use it for, and that's why we feel like it's the public library can be a really critical player in the local community to ensure that access that folks need for those resources that they need for education, for employment, for lifelong learning, and for personal enrichment.
Right, and I mean anybody who's lives in Austin and has been following the kind of saga of the new central library knows how expensive it is, but also knows they know how much we value libraries in this community and what we're willing to pay a massive price tag to have the latest and the cutting edge in that regard.
And it's going to have Google Fiber.
And it's going to have Google Fiber as well.
Yeah, it is. And not to go too much off into an advertisement for libraries, although I can do that. But I think one of the real great things, and I look at something like the new Austin Public Library, and I think this is a great platform for civic engagement, for people being able to, for the library to facilitate some conversations about what it means to live in Austin and to kind of address some of the issues that we have in the city, in addition to the cooking classes and all of the other real cool stuff that they're going to do. But I wanted to just, if I could go back to something that Mark had mentioned, you were talking about the connection speeds, and one of the things that I'm curious to ask is, because a lot of the times when we go and we measure the connection speeds that we're getting in our libraries across the state, a lot of times there's a disparity between what they think they're buying and what they actually have in terms of speed. And is that, I assume a lot of times that is because of equipment, internal connections, and other things. Is that the issue? Or?
It could be. It's always a weak link in the chain argument. Mm-hmm. So if you've been promised a certain speed, but you can only get it when you're plugged in, If you're testing it wirelessly, you're not going to get that speed. Or if your hardware is, not, you might have more speed than your hardware can deliver. So that can happen. But it can also be the case that you signed a contract for a speed up to agreement, and that speed, that you're on a shared network and you have a shared connection, and when your neighbors are using a lot of bandwidth, you're getting less. And so it really depends on the specific case. It could be any of those causes.
If I could, I'm sorry. God, that was real loud. I'm sorry to interrupt y'all. Y'all doing great, but we've got about 15 minutes left, so I want to turn it over to the audience if there are any questions out there.
Jacob, you have any more questions?
Come on, Jacob. Pull up a chair.
Hi. Mr. Strama, you had mentioned that there's a prohibition on municipally operated communications networks, which might mean my question isn't really that important. But one thing that I heard about is that there's places in North Carolina and maybe some other states that are doing municipally operated broadband networks. And so here in Texas, we have rural electric co-ops. And so I'm wondering, Representative Howard, if you think that rural broadband co-ops or something like that is something that we could use in Texas to help broaden broadband access.
Well, I think we have this prohibition that Mark mentioned, which precludes us from doing that unless we made some changes legislatively, and I don't know that there's the will to do that sort of thing. Mark can probably address it more from the market angle and how that impacts it. At the same time, I think it's like a lot of things that we now consider utilities that are necessary for life, and that this falls into that category now and needs to be looked at perhaps differently than we have looked at it in the past. But I think Mark probably has a better perspective on that from the market.
Yeah, so I have followed there's cities all over Colorado and Tennessee doing this. I'm not as familiar in North Carolina. And I think that what many of them are doing, the most famous example of it is Chattanooga, Tennessee, which has a fiber to the home network with gigabit speeds to its residents. It's widely regarded as highly successful, very well received by the population. Evidently it delivers excellent service from everything I've heard. It makes a strong case for these municipally delivered networks. I suspect that Representative Howard is right that the appetite would not exist in the legislature to repeal the existing state ban on it. What I would be interested in testing is whether something more along the lines of what I described in Huntsville, where the municipality or the utility, the rural electric co-op in many cases, which is, I think they're the perfect partner, builds a network but wholesales it to competitive private providers to deliver the service. Chattanooga's had great success being the provider, but other cities have not always had success doing that part of it. In fact, I mentioned we're in Provo. We're in Provo because the city of Provo built its own fiber to the home network, but then just found it not manageable to operate. Like, that's just not an easy business to operate. But building infrastructure, that's something cities and utilities and rural electric co-ops are unmatched at. And if they could build the infrastructure, but then make that infrastructure available to private providers to compete over, that seems like a pretty good scenario to me. And it might even fly in the legislature.
Maybe so.
Got one over here.
I'd like to go back to the access through education, access for youth. I met someone this summer who's a student at ACC in his early 20s, and he told me that attending ACC was the first opportunity he had to use a computer outside of school. He's a resident of Austin. And I'm wondering, other than the great work that we have done with infrastructure, with policy, with access to the internet in educational systems, including the library, other than transportation to these points of access, what is the major component that we're missing for young citizens right in our own city that do not have access. Thank you.
Wow, well, that, to me, I'm going to punt again to industry because I don't understand exactly what the problem is there. I do know that what you describe is definitely something that happens and happens in urban areas where you wouldn't think it would be happening. And we saw an article not too long ago in the Texas Tribune that showed students, I believe, I think it was in the Tribune, wherever it was, sitting outside of their classroom. Now, this was in the Valley, but sitting on the sidewalk.
It was in the New York Times.
It was in the New York Times, that's right, it was.
McAllen.
McAllen, Texas, sitting on the sidewalks outside of their school 7 o'clock at night doing their homework because they do not have access at home, and that's how the instruction was being delivered. And as it should be, that's the way the world works now. But it doesn't work that way for all of our children who do not have that access in their home. And perhaps somebody who's in the industry can give us more of an answer of why that is exactly.
Well, I mean, we do a lot of work with HACA, with the Housing Authority of the City of Austin, and we hear the same story about kids congregate around their offices after work because that's where they get the internet connection to do their homework. So, you know, we're working with HACA to try to get internet connectivity to be more abundant there, but it's a large-scale societal problem. There are three, you know, it's conventionally believed that there are three components to the digital divide, that the network access is one, the hardware access is a third, and the appetite and knowledge of how to use computers connected to the internet is the last one. So in the case of most young people who are getting computer education in school, it feels like that final one is probably solved. That component, the appetite and understanding, is more of a problem reaching older people, I think. But cost of a device and cost of a connection, those are real barriers for people. Just, you know, but, you know, look, let's acknowledge that the public schools are also dealing with kids who don't always come to school having had a complete meal that morning or the day before. So they've got that plus other problems, challenges to overcome.
Right.
Sir.
Representative Howard, have you ever considered taking a person on your staff who is technology savvy and also educated on policy?
And also what, on policy?
On policy? Like,
I hope
You know,
that's who he is.
Yeah.
Nope.
I,
You are. Are you applying?
I would if you would hire me. And Mr. Strama, maybe you can pitch in on this one. Have you considered using 8211E or E-band Wi-Fi in rural places? I mean, that seems like a no-brainer, and it's been out for a long time.
Yeah.
A range of 3 miles typically, right?
Yeah. I think the wireless technologies that are going to, here's my understanding as a non-engineer. As I said, there are a lot of wireless technologies already serving rural communities. There is a pretty rapid development of those technologies going on right now. We're pretty invested in some of that development. There is point-to-point wireless solutions that are going to be able to, you know, zap the signal from a transponder in one place to a receiver far away from it that avoids having to dig a trench and place wires in that trench to connect those two places. And then from that recipient place, you could then use a different wireless technology to go, instead of from point to point, to deliver that signal broadly. And then there are things, as you know, like I said on the edge, what Google did in Africa with the Project Loon.
There wouldn't be any reason why a municipality couldn't afford a couple E-transponders and put them up. But if I'm not mistaken, with the TV analog signal being replaced, most cities had almost all their
I couldn't speak to the engineering on that. That may be true. I don't know. I know that we're looking at ways to deliver a signal that reduces the cost of getting it to places where there aren't as many, where there's not enough population density to justify an organic underground network. And I suspect the technologies you're talking about are part of that solution, but I don't know. I'm not familiar enough with the engineering on it.
Anybody else over there? Oh,
Hello. I have several questions. One, what did anybody plan to make broadband connection a utility so that people that are disadvantaged have access to them through government program services and things? I would also like to mention that a lot of the VOP phone lines now have issues with connectivity that especially when they update a modem or something, or if there's a power loss, people are not able to make 911 phone calls because there's no battery backup if the power goes out. What are being done to make broadband, voice over IP, phone line, and TV fall under the old guidelines of the analog phone system, where they had their own power, they would stay powered up when there's a power loss?
I can address the classification issue first. At the Federal Communications Commission, there has been a big discussion of classification of broadband as a utility, and in adopting the current administration's net neutrality policy, they have formally classified broadband as a utility. They've done so in a narrow way. So broadband is not treated as a utility in a lot of other respects, but it is for the purpose of the FCC's ability to enforce net neutrality, which was a policy we were supportive of. To your question about holding all digital technologies accountable to the same requirements as bind analog technologies. Without knowing what all of those requirements are, I couldn't speak to it, but I would say that you do want to be cautious about requirements that might impede the advancement of those technologies.
well, folks, I think we're coming up on 3:30. Thank you all so much for being here. I look forward to seeing you all here tomorrow at 10 o'clock, 10:30. Thank you all, panel. Thank you. You guys are great.